people get lost, get crazy and disoriented in the name of love. Beyond the Transactional Soul, reclaiming covenantal love and relational healing in a therapeutic age.
In our current cultural moment, the language of the laboratory and the therapy couch has largely supplanted the language of the sanctuary and the covenant. We find ourselves navigating a landscape where the sovereign self seeks fulfillment through transactional exchanges, yet we remain haunted by a persistent ancient longing for a type of connection that the therapeutic model focused primarily on individual well-being, not fully articulated. By placing the insights of contemporary neuroscience and attachment theory alongside the rich relational anthropology of the Judeo-Christian tradition and the history of religions, we can begin to see how the covenantal framework offers a more robust architecture for healing and human flourishing than the contractual models of our therapeutic age.
A therapeutic age. So when you look at the landscape of modern dating apps and the optimization of our social lives, do you think we have a fundamental redefined love as a series of microtransactions intended to maximize personal utility, Mr. Meg?
To understand our modern malaise toward regarding relationships, we have to look at the historical frameworks we have abandoned. We have moved from what I call a covenantal ontology to a contractual or therapeutic one. In the history of religions, particularly following the phenomenology of Mircea Eliade, we see that ancient cultures viewed relationships not as private agreements, but as participations in a cosmic order. In his work, The Sacred and the Profane, Iliade suggests that for the archaic man, the world only becomes meaningful when it is hierophanic, that is, when the sacred breaks through. When relationships are desacralized, they become part of the profane world of objects and utility. To understand our own hearts, we must compare our current therapeutic scripts with the ancient ones they replaced. Today, the relationship is often viewed through the lens of a cost benefit analysis. If the return on investment on an emotional commitment drops, the contract is often deemed void. This is what the sociologist Robert Bella identified as the shift towards a culture where the self is the only source of authority. We see this tension playing out in the music of the 1960s. Take the 1964 classic by Dionne Warwick, Walk On By, written by Burt Bacharach and Hal David. The lyrics describe a person in deep relational trauma, yet the plea is for the other to maintain a certain distance to preserve the narrator's pride. It is a song about the breakdown of a bond, now reduced to a painful transaction of glances in the street. The Judeo Christian tradition offers a different map. In the Hebrew scriptures, the concept of berit or covenant is not a contract. A contract is about the protection of interest. A covenant is about the transformation of identity. Jonathan Z. Smith often reminded us that the map is not territory, and our modern therapeutic map often leaves out the topography of sacrifice. In the second century, Irenaeus of Lyon, in Against Heresies, argued that the human person is not a static object, but a becoming creature. For Irenaeus, we are made in the image of God, but we must grow into the likeness. This growth is inherently relational. It does not happen in a vacuum of self actualization. Even in the Greco Roman world, the Stoics, like Epictetus, saw the cosmologies as a web of relations. However, the Christian innovation, which we see in the writings of Paul, was the idea of members of one another as recorded in Romans 12. This is an organic metaphor. It suggests that my well being is literally impossible without yours. When we look at contemporary trauma research, such as Bessel van der Kolk's The Body Keeps the Score, we see a scientific echo of this. Trauma is not just a thought, it is a physiological disruption of the ability to connect. If we treat the self as a solo project, we miss the neurological reality that our brains are wired for the other. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections, tells us that our neural pathways are literally pruned and shaped by our primary attachments. When the music of the 1950s, like the Platters' The Great Pretender, speaks of the lonely tea for two, It captures the existential gap where the contract of social presence remains, but the covenant of shared reality has dissolved. We are pretending to be whole while our nervous systems are sounding the alarm of isolation. The therapeutic model helps us name the alarm, but it often lacks the ritual and communal grammar to silence it. We need a framework that recognizes that the self is not a substance, but a relationship. In conclusion, while the therapeutic model provides essential tools for self awareness, it often fails to account for the constitutive nature of covenantal bonds that define our biological and spiritual architecture, leading us to our next consideration of how our physical brains mirror this need for the other.
Mr. Mick, if our brains are truly social organs, how does the ancient concept of the image of God provide a more satisfying explanation for our relational needs than a simple evolutionary biology?
Consider the implications of what we are learning about mirror neurons, those cells that fire both when we act and when we observe another acting. And tell me if this does not feel like a biological substrate for what the patristic writers called mutual indwelling. When we talk about the imago Dei, or the image of God, we often think of it as a list of qualities: reason, will, or a soul. But if we look at the history of religions, particularly the shift from the fourth century Nicene fathers to the modern era, the image is increasingly understood as a relational capacity. Gregory of Nyssa, in his On the Making of Man, argued that the human person is a microcosm of the divine. If the divine in the Christian framework is a trinity, a communion of persons, then to be made in the image is to be made for communion. This is a fundamental departure from the Greco Roman concept of the self sufficient soul. This is not just high minded theory. It is a historical worldview that anticipates what John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth discovered in attachment theory. They found that a child's sense of self is not innate, but is reflected to them by the secure base of the caregiver. If the caregiver is absent or erratic, the image of the self is fractured. This mirrors what the ante Nicene father Tertullian hinted at in On the Testimony of the Soul, where he suggests the soul is naturally Christian because it is designed for a specific kind of love that recognizes as home. We are born looking for someone looking for us. In the early 1970s, soul music captured this perfectly. Think of Al Green's Let's Stay Together. It's not just a song about a contract, it's about a song staying together, whether times are good or bad, happy or sad. It is an articulation of a secure attachment that transcends the immediate emotional payoff. In psychological terms, Al Green is singing about earned, secure attachment. In the language of Jewish wisdom, he is singing about the steadfast covenantal love that persists even when the transaction is no longer profitable. Consider this with the anxious attachment we see in so many therapeutic interactions today. We are constantly checking in on our feelings, but as Soren Kierkegaard noted in Works of Love, if love is based only on the fluctuations of the heart, it has no standing ground. Kierkegaard argued that Christian love is a duty, not because it is a burden, but because it is a command that protects the love from our own fickle emotions. It anchors the relationship in something outside the sovereign self. This anchor is what allows the nervous system to relax. From a neuroscience perspective, this anchoring is crucial for downregulating the amygdala. When we are in a covenant relationship, one where exit is not the first option on the table, our nervous system can move out of survival mode and into social engagement mode. Stephen Porges's polyvagal theory explains that our ventral vagal system, which allows for connection and calm, is activated by the safety of the other. The image of God suggests we are hardwired for this safety. We are not just biological machines. We are beings whose very hardware requires the software of love to function correctly. The Reformation thinkers also wrestled with this. Martin Luther, in his The Freedom of Christian, spoke of the happy exchange where the soul and Christ are like a bride and bridegroom, exchanging their belongings. Luther's anthropology is profoundly relational. For him, the human person is either curved in on itself or extrapolated towards the higher neighbor and God. Sin, in this framework, is the ultimate attachment disorder. It is the refusal to be relational. When we look at the 1950s doo-wop of the Flamingos, I only have eyes for you, we see a secular ritualization of this focus. The world disappears because the other has become the primary regulator of the self's reality. While the therapeutic model might warn against codependency here, a historian religion sees a liminal state where the individual ego is being transcended for the sake of a higher union. We are finding ourselves by losing ourselves in the other. In conclusion, our biological wiring for attachment serves as a physical witness to the ancient claim that we are created as relational beings, suggesting that healing must occur not just within the mind, but within the space between two persons.
Within the space. So, Mr. Mick, if we are needed, or if we are indeed wired for the other, why does our modern culture find the concept of a patient endurance so difficult to integrate into our self care routines?
Have you noticed how our modern therapeutic advice often encourages us to walk away the moment a relationship becomes draining, whereas the ancients saw the staying as the very site of the miracle? In the New Testament and early Christian literature, the Greek word hypermone is often translated as patience or endurance, but in its first century context, especially in the letters of James and the writings of the Apostolic Fathers, it means something much more active. It is active, patient endurance. It is the ability to hold a space under pressure. This is a far cry from the modern transactional model, where if the relationship does not provide immediate joy or peace, it is deemed dysfunctional. As a historian of religions, I look at how the Stoics, like Marcus Aurelius in his Meditations, valued hypermone as a form of inner citadel building. However, for the early Christians, this endurance was not about building a wall, but about bearing one another's burdens, as seen in Galatians 6. It was relational. Consider the fourth century father John Chrysostom. In his homilies on Ephesians, he speaks of marriage as a martyrdom, not in the sense of misery, but in the sense of witness. The witness is that my commitment to you is more real than my current feeling of frustration. This requires a level of emotional regulation that therapy seeks to provide, but often lacks the theological scaffolding to sustain. This staying power is exactly what is required for neuroplastic change. You do not rewire a brain in a weekend retreat. You rewire it through what Nietzsche described in Beyond Good and Evil as a long obedience in the same direction. If we are dealing with trauma, the brain needs the consistent, predictable presence of a regulated other to learn how to self regulate. When we opt out because of a bad vibe, we are often resetting the trauma clock. We are confirming the brain's suspicion that the world is unsafe and people are unreliable. In the 1960s, the Rolling Stones, covering Irma Thomas, sang Time is on my side. There is a profound relational truth there. Time is the medium of healing. In our therapeutic age, we want breakthroughs and quick resolutions, but the Judeo Christian tradition, and even the Greco Roman one, emphasizes process. The Jewish wisdom of the ethics of the fathers tells us it is not your duty to finish the work, but neither are you at liberty to neglect it. This applies to relationships. We are works in progress, and the work requires a container of time. The transactional model says, I will stay as long as you are the person I signed up for. The covenantal model says, I will stay while you become the person you are meant to be. This reflects the unconditional positive regard of Carl Rogers, but is grounds in a historical vow rather than a clinical technique. It moves from professional empathy to personal solidarity. Think of the 1970 hit by the Five Stair Steps, Ooh Child. It is a song of hypermone. The lyrics promise that things are going to get easier and things will get brighter. It is a promise made in the midst of the struggle. It does not offer an immediate solution to the trauma, it offers a presence through it. This is what the patristic writers meant by active waiting. It is a remembering of the promise while the current reality is dark. It is refusal to let the present pain have the final word. Blaise Pascal, in his Pensées, noted that all of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. I would add that many of our relational problems stem from our inability to sit quietly in a room with a hurting partner. Our flight or fight response is triggered by the other's pain. The therapeutic model often validates the flight as setting boundaries. While the boundaries are necessary for safety, the covenantal model asks if we can be the container for this pain without being consumed by it. In conclusion, the ancient virtue of hypermone provides a necessary corrective to our exit heavy therapeutic culture, offering the time and stability required for deep neurological and spiritual transformation.
Mr. Mick, if we accept that staying is the site of healing, how do we handle the reality of sin or brokenness without falling back into the shame-based model that therapeutic aids work so hard to dismantle?
The question is, how do we distinguish between enabling a destructive behavior and the radical grace that the reformers argued was the only thing capable of actually changing a human heart? This brings us to the heart of the transactional versus covenantal divide. A transaction is based on merit. I give because you have earned. A covenant, and specifically the Christian understanding of grace, is a gift. In the history of religions, the gift is a complex category. Marcel Mauss, in his classic The Gift, showed that in traditional societies, a gift creates a bond that is more powerful than a purchase. A purchase ends a relationship, a gift begins it. Friedrich Nietzsche was famously suspicious of this. In Spoke There Zarathustra, he saw the gift giving virtue as potentially a way to exert power over the other. And he is not entirely wrong. In many toxic relationships, kindness is used as a weapon to induce guilt. This is where the therapeutic model is incredibly helpful. It identifies the strings attached to the gift, it names the manipulation, it recognizes when a gift is actually a debt in disguise. However, the theology of the cross proposed by Martin Luther offers a deeper insight. Luther argued in the Heidelberg Disputation that God's love does not find, but creates that which is pleasing to it. This is a radical relational shift. If I am only looking for the pleasing qualities in my partner, the transactional model, I will eventually run out of reasons to love. But if my love is a gift that creates value in the other, then the relationship becomes a generative space. I am not just a consumer of your personality, I am a participant in your becoming. This is where neuroscience and relational healing converge. When a person who feels unlovable, perhaps due to disorganized attachment or childhood trauma, is met with grace rather than judgment, it creates a massive mismatch in their internal working model. This prediction error, as neuroscientists call it, is the key to neuroplasticity. The brain has to update its map of the world. It's thought it was a burden. It is a being treated as a treasure. This is the physiological basis of redemption. In the 1960s, Aretha Franklin sang, "Do right woman, do right man." The lyrics are clear. A woman's only human. You should understand, she's not just a plaything. She's flesh and blood, just like her man. It is a call for mutual recognition. It is not just a request for kindness. It is a demand to be seen as a person. This is the I-thou relationship described by Martin Buber. Buber, the great Jewish philosopher, argued in I and Thou that all real living is meeting. When we treat the other as an it, as a tool for our own self care, we lose our own humanity in the process. The therapeutic age often focuses on self love as a prerequisite for loving others. But a historian of religions might look at the first century golden rule or the John Haninian command to love one another as I have loved you in John 13 and see a different sequencing. We learn to love by being loved. Our attachment to a loving source, whether God or a secure base human, is what allows us to give without the fear of depletion. We are not self generating batteries, we are conduits. When we look at the 1950s torch songs, like Julie London's Cry Me a River, we see the transactional hollow. The narrator is waiting for the debt of tears to be paid, but in a covenantal framework, the debt is canceled. This is not cheap grace, it is costly grace, as Dietrich Bonhoeffer called it. It is costly because it requires the death of the ego's demand for justice. It requires us to give up the right to be right. In conclusion, by moving beyond the shadow of the transaction and into the logic of the gift, we create not only the psychological and spiritual environment, but this is where the true redemption of the self and other can occur. So here's where we think about the catalyst for change. What role of memory play? This is something to
Yes,
ask.
Mr. Mick. So, if grace is the catalyst for change, what role does the memory play in the process, specifically the remembering of our stories that both therapies and ancient liturgies seems so obsessed with?
We can know something is true in our heads, but our bodies will still react as if the old trauma is happening right now. The ancient concept of recalling helps bridge that gap. In the history of religions, remembering is not just recalling a fact, it is the present. When the early church celebrated the Eucharist, the remembrance was believed to make the past event real in the present moment. Jonathan Z. Smith would point out that ritual is a means of performing this the way things ought to be. It is a way of bringing a different reality into the present. This is exactly what happens in trauma informed therapy. When we engage in narrative exposure therapy, or EMDR, we are not just talking about the past, we are reprocessing it. We are remembering the fragmented pieces of a shattered self. The 4th century Father Augustine of Hippo, in his Confessions, provides the ultimate script for this. He spends the entire book remembering his life in the presence of the other. He realized that his memory was the stomach of the soul. He had to digest his past to be free of it. Augustine's insight is profoundly neurobiological. Our autobiographical memory is what gives us a coherent self. Trauma breaks the narrative. It leaves us with flashbacks, sensory fragments that have no timestamp. The therapeutic work is to put those fragments into a story. But the covenantal work is to put that story into a larger story. We move from my trauma to our journey. In the 1970s, Bill Withers gave us the anthem of this relational remembering with Lean on Me. The lyrics urge us to swallow our pride because no one can fill the needs that we will not let show. Withers is talking about vulnerability. In attachment terms, he is talking about the haven. When we let show our brokenness and it is received by a covenantal partner, the trauma is restored. It is kept safely and it is healed. It is no longer a monster under the bed. It is a chapter in a book of redemption. The reformer John Calvin, in the opening of his Institutes of the Christian Religion, said that nearly all the wisdom we possess consists of two parts, the knowledge of God and of ourselves. He argued these are inextricably linked. You cannot know yourself by looking in a mirror. You know yourself by looking at the one in whose image you are made and being known by others. This mirrors what interpersonal neurobiology tells us. The self is not a thing, but a process of relational integration. This is why communal memory is so powerful. If my memory of myself is that I am unlovable, I need a covenantal relationship to provide a counter narrative. I need a liturgy of the everyday where I am remembered as beloved. This is what Huldrych Zwingli, despite his more symbolic view of the sacraments, understood about the communal aspects of the Lord's Supper. It is a sign of the commitment of the community to one another. Think of the 1967 classic, To Love Somebody by the Bee Gees. You don't know what it's like to love somebody the way I love you. It is an ache for recognition. In the history of religion's lens, this ache is the longing for the origin. We want to be known fundamentally. The therapeutic model helps us to know our patterns, but the covenantal model offers us a knownness that precedes our patterns. It tells us we were loved before we were broken. In conclusion, the practice of anamnesis, remembering, whether in a liturgical or a therapeutic context, allows us to rewire our traumatic past by integrating them into a relational present that is grounded in a steadfast promise.
Very well said, Mr. Mick. As we think about this promise, how do we navigate the fear of the future that is so often drives us back into our safety of transactional contracts?
We've talked about the past and the present, but what about the future? The covenantal model of hope differs from the therapeutic model of optimism or positive thinking. As we wrap up our discussion, we look at the teleology, the end goal. The therapeutic model often seeks homeostasis, a state of balance or stress reduction. This is good. We want less stress. But the Judeo Christian anthropology suggests that flourishing is not just the absence of stress, but presence of meaningful struggle in the context of hope. It is the difference between a life that is merely comfortable and a life that is truly alive. In the 1950s, the Earls song, I Believe, spoke of a reason for every star that passes by. While it might sound simple, it points to a providential view of reality. A covenant is a providential relationship. It says, we do not know what the future holds, but we know who holds the future. This is what allows for active patience endurance. If I believe the relationship is a site of divine or cosmic significance, I can weather the seasons where the return on investment is zero. The great 20th century Jewish thinker Abraham Yahshua Heschel argued in The Sabbath that we need palaces in time. A covenantal relationship is a palace in time. It is a sacred space that is walled off from the market of transactions. In this space, we can afford to be weak. This is where the neuroscience of safety meets the theology of the cross. We find strength in admitting our powerlessness. When we look at the 1970s singer-songwriter era, think of Carole King's You've Got a Friend. We see the secularization of this covenantal promise. The song promises that through winter, spring, summer, or fall, all you have to do is call. It is a vow, and it is a vow that allows the nervous system to rest. We do not have to perform to keep the relationship. We perform because we are in the relationship. The order of operations matters. The therapeutic individualism of our age tells us not to depend on anyone too much, but the history of religion tells us that we are defined by our dependencies. The New Testament calls this koinonia, a participation or fellowship. It is not a support group where we share our problems. It is a body where we share our lives. This is the ultimate neurointegration, when two nervous systems become a single resilient unit. As we move forward, we should not toss out the therapeutic tools. We need the language of boundary, self-regulation, and trauma awareness, but we must reframe them. We use the tools of therapy to serve the ends of covenant. We regulate our nervous system so that we can be present to the other. We process our trauma so that we can keep our promises. We become healthy so that we can become holy, and we become holy by being relational. Ultimately, the healing we seek is not individualistic, it is relational. As the 1960s soul pioneer Sam Cooke sang, a change is going to come. The change comes and happens not just in our heads, it happens in the space between us where grace operates, memory is healed, and endurance bears fruit. We are not just patients in a clinic, we are pilgrims in a covenant. In conclusion, a covenantal framework does not reject the therapeutic age, but enlarges it, providing the ontological depth and historical wisdom necessary to move from survival to flourishing in our love letters to one another. So as we think about this, this is a liturgy of reconnection. And for listeners, we want to be able to integrate all of these concepts, remembering in a modern grounding techniques.
Interesting, Mr. Meg. Thank you for that. And as we said, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. Beyond the Transactional Soul, reclaiming covenantal love and relational healing in the therapeutic age were often framed as exchanges of needs, validation, and personal fulfillment. The deeper language of covenant has quietly faded from our collective imagination. So, Mr. Mike, would you like to plug in something?
Sure, I appreciate the opportunity. Write the book, grow the business. Connect with me on LinkedIn. G. Make the Dr. Digital Smith, PhD. Listen to the Dr. Digital podcast. Pick up a couple volumes I have on Amazon. On Track, Ian Hunter, and Burning America.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Mick, the Doctor of Digital. And please do listen to our other podcasts, Music 101, Love Letters, Mental Health 101, and of course, Sex 101 coming after this. So, Mr. Mick, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, my friend. Till next time, Day is long.
My God, people, see you soon.